Good evening and welcome to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's live virtual programs coming to you from Prince George's County in Maryland. Tonight's broadcast features wonderful library staff discussing YA books as part of our weekly Reader's Advisory virtual event series. Please join us in the conversation on social media using the hashtag PGCMLS Book Chat. We'll be monitoring the chats live on Crowdcast Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and look forward to chatting with you as we go. Enjoy the program.
Hello, welcome to the Young Adult Reader's Advisory. My name is Rachel Troyanos, and I work at the Bowie branch of Prince George's County Memorial Library System. And we have Heather Jackson and Kelsey Hughes with us today. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'm Heather Jackson, and I'm the area manager for our West branches, so New Carrollton, Hyattsville, Bladensburg, and Mount Rainier.
And I'm Kelsey Hughes. I'm the librarian 3 at the South Bowie branch.
Awesome, thank you. So we are going to be talking about young adult and everything that entails. So first question of the evening, why young adult? For me, I just started reading young adult and never stopped. And I literally cannot stop. I love it so much, but no real reason why.
I love YA because there's so much within it. It's really, when people think of YA, I think they have a specific idea in mind, think of maybe Twilight or the Harry Potter series, but it's such an expansive area of literature. It tends to have a lot of coming of age stories, a lot of character development, which I love, so much diversity within it. And so there's just a lot to love and enjoy within YA.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and I think YA is really great because it's very universal. Like, all of the experiences that you have while you're actually in that age group, so it's like a tween or as a teen, they apply even when you're an adult. You can look back and remember those things. If you're in it as a teen, it's reflecting your own lived experience, which I think is great. And that's even true when you get into fantasy or sci-fi with YA, because the emotion behind it is always very universal. The themes tend to be very universal. And I really like how diverse the genre is. There's just something for everyone in it.
So why do you guys think that young adult works matter?
Well, I just think it's so important for teens to be able to see themselves in literature. As Heather mentioned, such a foundational time for all of us. It's such an important time. So much is happening. So many changes are happening. And you need to be able to see those experiences reflected in a way that helps you understand them, process them, make sense of them, and also understand the way others around you that are your peers may be processing their lives. So you can also understand experiences that are different from your own too.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there was a lot of attention given to teens until recently as well, and how difficult the teen age is. So I think that the young adult fiction really helps, grown-ups understand what's going on in the young adult world as well.
Yeah, I definitely see that. You're able to delve into complicated topics that everyone's facing by viewing it through a teen lens sometimes, in a way that both is more relevant, because I think teens are often, they are the trendsetters and they are at the front of curves, and they are our activists right now. They are the innovators as well. And so for that element of YA, I think that's a really cool feature of it, and also really important. And one of the reasons that I get really frustrated when people are like, oh, that's a teen book, or oh, that's a kid's book, as though that's like dismissive or a negative about it, when I really think that that's a huge positive. And I often try to steer even adults into YA work, because the quality of the literature is just as high. The quality of the storytelling is just as high. it just happens to have a younger person maybe as the protagonist.
Yeah.
So again, it's sort of back to that like universality of theme and emotion, but also being sort of cutting edge on what topics are really in the now.
Yes. And like these kids are going to be voting soon as well, you know? Let's get into this. Let's get into some books. What young adult literature have you loved most recently? I can go first. I recently read Arc of a Scythe series by Neil Shusterman, and I absolutely loved it. So it's kind of sci-fi in the future, and society has completely eradicated death. So to keep the population under control, there are people that are assigned to be scythes, and they like kill a certain amount of people per day. And I don't want to say anything else, but it's so good. I really loved it recently.
I've heard a lot of great things about that series.
I love Neil Shusterman. He's just so good. All right. Kelsey, would you like to say a young adult that you've loved most recently?
Yeah, I want to share two. So the first one is, it's called Check Please, and I have it here. So this is the first book. It's a 2-book graphic novel series. Check Please is the first one, and then there's Check Please 2 just came out like this month or last month. I can't keep track of my months anymore. But it's a really wonderful series about hockey, a hockey team, a college hockey team in Canada. The first book starts with the main character. He's called Biddy because all hockey players get nicknames based on their last name. So his last name is Biddle, so he's Biddy, who's a figure skater and loves to bake pies. And he joins the hockey team, and he's nervous about it because he is not a hockey player, he's a figure skater, but he ends up becoming really good at it. And what I like about this book is it's very, well, first of all, I'm a huge hockey fan, so that's fun. But even if you're not a hockey fan, it really kind of goes against those really macho masculine stereotypes in sports and allows everyone on the team to express their own, way that they came into the sport and be themselves. The main character, Biddy, he falls in love with one of his teammates, and there's some tension there, and but it's really adorable. And he's also a vlogger, and the author also writes tweets for him at the end. So it's just very like current and very fun and very sweet. And the sequel was awesome. So really highly recommend both of those. It's become one of my favorite books.
So even if I don't like hockey, I will enjoy this.
Even if you don't like hockey, it'll turn you into a hockey fan.
I don't believe you, but okay. I will give it a shot. Heather, what young adult literature have you loved most recently?
Okay, so recently I read The Education of Margot Sanchez. This one's really interesting to me because it was sort of a twist on the fish out of water story. So, usually you have the person that's being like plopped down into the like really fancy school, and it's like, oh, I don't fit in here. How do I navigate this? And this is the opposite. So Margot's been going to a really fancy school, but that's not where she's from, right? And so she makes some poor life choices, and
I can relate.
the consequences of those life choices are that she has to sort of work off her debt for this in her neighborhood where she's grown up, but she really has been removed from for quite some time, having gone to this other school. And so it's coming into the other part of her identity that she's maybe sort of pushed to the side for a while, and learning to really love her culture and love the neighborhood that she's in, and to see those things in a positive light. And I thought it was just a clever inversion of things, but it also was just really, really relatable for pretty much anybody, because everyone's felt out of place at some time. And what do you do if the place where you feel out of place is your home?
Yeah.
And sort of what do you do with those emotions? And it has just like great elements to it as well. Of course, there's a bit of a love story, and yes, of course, always YA with the love story is great. And then just also family relationships and friendships, and the importance of those bonds and how they kind of evolve. And it's just a lovely book. I really enjoyed it a lot. And then I also revisited a book that I have read more than once because it's one of my favorites. But I went back and revisited Akata Witch recently.
I haven't read that.
Oh my gosh, it's my favorite. So it's one of my all-time favorites. I'll talk more about it later because I think we were going to do some talking about diversity and experiences outside of your own, and that's really dear to my heart in that regard. But it's one of those where the author wrote another series recently, and so because I was diving into that, I wanted to go back and return to it again, and it's just as good on reread as it is the first time. So recent to me, but not recent always to me. So long time ago and then current for me, and just a really great book.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. So you kind of just answered this. What are your favorite young adult books of all time? Any that resonated with you when you were younger? So Akata, which I think is newer, right?
So it's not that new. So I think it came out in like 2009,
Oh, really?
2007.
Okay.
Yeah, Nnedi Okorafor has been around for a little while, but it's awesome. So I definitely read it as an adult and not as a child. But yeah, I think that actually, before I answer the things that resonated when I was a kid, so side question for you guys. What defines something as YA literature? Because I think that's really, is it the age of the protagonist, or is it because it was written for an audience of teenagers? Because I think that some of the things that resonated for me when I was that age, they had teen protagonists in them, but maybe weren't necessarily considered YA literature, right? Like To Kill a Mockingbird. It definitely deals with a tween, but it wasn't written as YA fiction because that didn't exist when Harper Lee wrote it. But to me, that would be YA just as much as some of the other books that we would talk about now. So, like, what do you guys think about that? What are we considering YA for this discussion?
For this discussion, or like my thoughts in general?
Maybe both.
Okay. So whenever people ask me for young adult books, I usually will look for the characters being young adults. I don't know that necessarily there's a certain theme that is, or like set of subjects that is particularly young adult. I think that a lot of different things can be touched on in young adult literature, but I guess because when the characters are young adult, for me, that makes me label it as young adult. But you're right, though. I think we have the To Kill a Mockingbird in the adult section, and I don't know that I would put that there now.
Yeah.
Or like Lord of the Flies, and that definitely
That's
is
definitely young adult.
within. It's all of the characters basically, except for the points, are teens.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I agree. The protagonist is the biggest one for me. It's the first thing I look for. I think also it is important to think about the author's intention, because sometimes there are themes that might resonate with a teen, even though the character might be older or younger. There might be other reasons that make it YA based on what the author had in mind. And there might be a book that has a teen protagonist, but really isn't YA. I mean, I can't think of one, but I think that there are other reasons that it might classify. But this makes me also think about the Alex Awards. So the American Library Association has the Alex Awards, which are books that are classified as adult and were written for adult, but which have teen appeal. So there definitely is some kind of gray area, and it can get a little tricky deciding whether or not a book is a YA book, because there are so many different factors at play, and the definition is kind of murky.
Yeah. Ooh, that was a good question, Heather.
Yeah, it makes it hard to answer the original question, though, right? Because certainly the things that I loved the most when I was younger wouldn't necessarily be considered YA. We don't shelve them with YA. So like, Toni Morrison, we don't typically shelve Beloved and Teen necessarily, but to me, that was a YA book. It was incredibly resonant for me when I read it. as a teenager. I think Harry Potter kind of spans things. So like, yeah, we put the latter ones in teen, but some places don't. Some leave the whole series in the children's section rather than the teen section. So to me, that also resonated as a YA series, but you know, because we grow with Harry throughout it. So like, yeah, he starts when he's 11. We start in book 1 when he's young, but we grow with him into his teenage years, and it feels very YA, certainly by the time we get to the later books. So books like that, you know, obviously things like The Outsiders. So like that's the canonical, this is the beginning of YA book, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like books like that, I think were really meaningful. Catcher in the Rye, I think a lot of people talk about. It wasn't one of my favorites, but again, it's one of those, oh, we put it in classics, but it's about a teenager, you know, so it is YA to me. How about you guys? What really stuck out to you when you were a teen yourself?
I love The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I think Kelsey does too.
Yeah.
I was telling her earlier, my first tattoo I got when I was 18 was a quote from The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yeah, that book was super foundational for me. I made a playlist with the songs on the mixtape that he plays, and I would listen to it, and I was like feeling so emo, so cool, you know, the Smiths. Yeah, that was a really important book to me growing up.
But I think that's a really good, going back a little bit. Had young adult, the like genre existed before, I think a lot of stuff would be in it that we are just calling classics, and that's very interesting to me. It's just a classic to me, but it is young adult. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's often my argument when people are like, oh, it's just teen. It's like, okay, tell me how it's different from, you know, these books over here.
Yeah.
How is it different from The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, right? That's also, you know, preteen, teen protagonist. It's not really very different. And I think that there's a reason that those books are in classics now. And I expect many of our YA titles that we talk about tonight may end up in that section
Yes.
down the road.
I was just talking to someone about The Hate You Give,
Oh, yeah.
and how that one is already like very quickly becoming a classic status book, and it's being taught on college campuses and has already kind of, you know, quote unquote transcended the YA label. It's become a much more universal book, even though it was originally for a YA audience.
Yeah, and there's other YA titles like that, right? And I think we may be touching on some of those authors down the road, but like All American Boys, I think has also been a book that has really been, you know, on the pulse of what's happening in a way that it's just been resonant beyond the genre. And again, will it be on a classic shelf down the road? Yeah, I think it's quite possible, right? It's an important book.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
relevant.
It's good, but it's important as well.
Yes. It's just so relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. So we answered favorite YA books of all time, I think, Heather.
Can I talk about a more current one?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I have like the ones that resonated with me as a youth, which is definitely Perks, and also Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist was a huge one for me growing up. Music books definitely were very resonant with me as a teen. But more recently, I have two that I've really loved and have kind of instantly become my go-to favorite teen books that I recommend to everyone. The first one is Little Brother by Cory Doctorow.
Okay.
What I really love about this one is that it's all about privacy, surveillance, like kind of understanding our new world with all of this technology we have. And so it explores a very near future in which we may maybe go a little too far with our surveillance technology. But also what I like about it is that it explains a lot of concepts that you may be learning about for the first time, or maybe hearing in the world around you, but don't really understand, like a VPN, how a computer works, how your private connections work, what a hacker is, things that are like becoming very important to understand in order to navigate the world. I really like that this book does that in a way that's not condescending and helps people navigate some really tricky topics around how much privacy should we give up in exchange for security and safety, and what does that mean, and what does that look like, and how can that go bad, and things that are really important to me that I think a lot about. And again, it's a YA book, but very resonant to anyone who's kind of grappling with that right now. So that's a really, really great one that I, like I said, recommend to everyone. And then another one that I absolutely love is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. So that is very different from Little Brother.
Yeah.
And it traces, it's a kind of romantic story between two teens who are both having mental health issues, both experiencing depression. One of them, it's more like long term. He's bipolar, and it's something he's dealt with his whole life. The other girl, it was triggered by a traumatic event, and she's kind of grappling with this new experience and understanding herself in this new context, and they kind of find each other and try to help each other process their experiences. And it's really sad and really beautiful, and it's recently been turned into a show that I can't bring myself to watch because I don't know if it's going to be good or not. But it's one of my favorite books, and I don't often reread books that I've read, and it's one that I found myself turning back to because I feel like it's a very realistic portrayal of mental illness. So yeah, that's another one that I love. And I feel like it's a more current Perks of Being a Wallflower. So maybe that's why I like it so much.
I never reread either, and I reread that book as
Yeah.
well, and it was just as good the second time around. Like, pulled all my heartstrings.
Yeah.
Good pick, Kelsey.
Thanks.
So you brought up a Cory Doctorow book, Kelsey, and that's another thing while we're talking about this, like, what is YA? A lot of authors cross over between adult fiction and teen fiction, or adult graphics and teen graphics. And Doctorow is one of those where I feel like there's probably a lot of adults who are familiar with him for his more adult work, even if it's like his blogs or something like that, but that might then be willing to use that as an entry point to the world of YA literature. And like graphics, I think especially are like that. You get a lot of crossover of authors, and you get a lot of crossovers of illustrators as well, to where I think either it can grow with you if you're a teen, where you kind of then grow into the author's like later works that are maybe a little bit more edgier, they're a little bit harder. Or it can work the other way, where as an adult you can be like, oh, I love this person. Well, now I'm curious what they did, with this teen book.
We were just Rachel and I were talking about that earlier with Daniel Handler, because I loved the Lemony Snicket books growing up. As I got older, I read his teen books, Why We Broke Up and The Basic Eight. And, I've also read his adult books, which are very different, but have that same very dark theme. And so, yeah, definitely, I think, can help you kind of build that transition into your later reading habits. Especially from a teen perspective, when you find an author you love, I think it's awesome when they write in both genres, because it can help you build to maybe something more advanced or complex or challenging too.
I agree. I think Rachel and I were talking about Brian K. Vaughan earlier with Paper Girls, and then Saga, which is a lot edgier. But again, in the graphics realm, you still have that sort of like, okay, well, this is, tween teen protagonists, and there's this series, but I love it, so I'm going to graduate into this harder, more challenging work. Yeah, I think that's great that so many authors are willing to do that now. And there's not as much of a pigeonholing, where I think you used to see that more too, where it was like, no, this person just writes teen, and like they don't let them explore anything else. Or, the writing for teen would not be like serious writing, I guess. And I think a lot of that stigma has disappeared recently. Akata Witch that I mentioned earlier, Nnedi Okorafor, she writes adult books now too. So I think being able to have sort of that whole universe of an author's oeuvre is great, at all age ranges.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really love Binti, her sci-fi novella for adults.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay, so I have another question. Are you ready?
Go for
Ready.
it.
A young adult has become an increasingly diverse genre over the years. What are some books you've read that have helped you learn about different cultures, experiences, or identities that are not your own? I can go first with one. I recently read A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahira Mafi, and it was very eye-opening to me to see 9/11 from the viewpoint of someone who practices Islam. So 9/11, that was like I was in like 8th grade, I lived through it, and then to read from the other side of how mean people were and the misconceptions, I didn't really realize were happening at the same time I was growing up. I just thought it was a really good book. Kelsey?
Let's see. A couple came to mind. I want to highlight The 57 Bus by Dashka Slater because it's nonfiction, and there's some really great YA nonfiction out there. This one in particular really stuck with me and has stuck with me. I read it 2 years ago now, I think, and the story stuck with me. It's about two teens who live in different parts of Oakland. One is a more privileged white teen who is non-binary and uses they pronouns, they them pronouns, and then another young Black teen who lives in a poorer part of Oakland. And the story is about they in the story, Dashka emphasizes that they only share the same bus ride for 8 minutes before they go off into two totally different parts of the city and have two totally different experiences. But in that story, during one of those bus rides, the young Black teen sets the other character, I wish I could remember their names, character's skirt on fire. And so the first half of the story, it's being explored as a hate crime, and you start to learn more about the white teen's identity as being non-binary and how they kind of came to understand their identity and what that experience was like. And then the second half, you feel like it's a pretty straightforward story about a hate crime, but then the second half you learn more about the young Black teen and his experiences and what led to that moment, and also teen brain psychology and why he might have done what he did, and kind of the complexities that went into that moment. And then you start to learn about the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system in particular. And so these are all topics that I didn't really know a lot about. I don't know what it's like to live in Oakland. I don't know what it's like to be non-binary. I don't know what it's like to grow up in a poorer neighborhood. I don't know what it's like to be get into the juvenile justice system. And so I think that book was eye-opening for so many reasons, and it's actually not a very long book, and it packs a lot very deftly and very thoughtfully into one very short book. So I really love that one.
You said it was nonfiction too.
And it's a nonfiction, so it's a true story.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I might actually riff on some nonfiction as well.
I never read nonfiction, so give it to me.
Yeah, so Nazi Hunters by Neil Bascom. So I think it presents a really different angle of on World War II than we normally get. I think we're all sort of more familiar with concentration camps, what was happening in Europe during the time. Maybe we have some understanding of, the development of nuclear weapons in the United States and, the rush to build the bomb. This is actually looking post-World War II at the escaped Nazis who were able to get away primarily to Argentina. And it follows a group of Israeli, sort of their version of the CIA, I guess you would say. So the Mossad agents from Israel who were trying to track down Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the most notorious Nazis in terms of the amount of damage he did and the number of lives that were, lost due to his orders and his plans. So it follows them to Argentina, and it reads so fast, and it reads like fiction. It reads like, a Tom Clancy or a John Grisham, like it's a thriller, but it really happened, and it's crazy to see it from that angle, and to just sort of have that perspective on things was really interesting. And I find that it's a book that because it reads so much like fiction, seems to really make the experience a lot more interesting, and people are willing to engage with it on a different level than they might with something that is a historical fiction. Being able to see actual photos of the people who were involved with it, like, makes it a lot more real to people. So that would be one that I found presented different angles on an event that I thought I knew really well. And then I think also Akata Witch, that I mentioned earlier, is set in Nigeria. So I got a lot out of that book that, I wasn't even expecting to get out of it from a cultural perspective, because it's, we house it as sci-fi fantasy, but it's very much steeped in that culture. So I thought that was really cool. And then I mentioned All American Boys earlier, but Jason Reynolds in general, I feel like I've gotten so much out of his books where, it's outside of my direct experience, but it makes, the experience of another person's lived experience a lot more real to me and immediate. So another book that he did is called Long Way Down. And again, he's just really amazing at being able to put you in a story to where you really feel like you're in it and you're seeing it through the characters' eyes and viewpoints. And like many of Jason Reynolds' books, it's very on topic and, very current. It's a book of the now. So I think it goes very directly to gun violence, and a teen gun violence, and just gives a really fresh perspective on that issue that I think makes it really relatable for everybody. And like reading it as an adult, I think it was, especially just with school violence and with how much kids are sort of worried about that and worrying about gun violence happening in your immediate environment or two people, it really gave me a new perspective on that. And I always find that I walk away from any of Jason Reynolds' books with just, a world of thoughts on someone else's experiences and feeling like I've got a better handle on what that must be like.
Did either of you read Dear Martin by Nick Stone? It's a similar book with gun violence, but it involves the police as well. So I guess it's more like All American Boys. Yeah, it's really good though. I would highly recommend it. It follows a boy named Justice, and he's driving with his friend, and they're involved in some gun violence, and it really makes you think. And this boy Justice, he's writing to Martin Luther King in this book. That's why it's called Dear Martin. And he's like going through like all of his feelings of like all the injustice of everything that he deals with every day. So, side note. Okay. Did you guys want to talk any more about that?
Oh man, there's so many.
I know.
Like, I feel like YA is just particularly great at giving a new perspective or really exploring culture.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's so many international authors who I've really loved who have written YA books that have been eye-opening to me, or just, where you just feel really immersed in a culture that's not your own, to the point that you really start to identify with the expectations of that culture. That is a universal, right? Like any culture we're a part of, we have expectations on us, especially when we're teens. And so seeing the expectations of a different culture, you can relate to the emotion of it, but then you're also learning about what would it be like to grow up in this society or in this country, or in this political regime. whatever it is. So I think YA is just really, really good at that. And then I think YA graphics have been pretty amazing with that as well. I didn't mention it earlier when you're talking about like books that really resonated with us when we were kids, but Mouse was one for me
Yes.
that, is a graphic, and like Persepolis, I know has been that for a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Oh,
Persepolis
wow.
was really
Like
big for me.
if you didn't have the graphic portion of that, it would not be the same, right? Like the art is so much a part of it, and it makes the experience so tangible, in a way that just the words on a page would not have done, the same justice to. So I think that's like a really American Born Chinese, like there's Boxers and Saints, like there's so many that I can think of where it's like, oh wow, I didn't know about that, or I feel differently about this issue now because I read this book. I think YA is just particularly wonderful for that.
Yes, I agree. You don't even realize that you're learning about other things. You're just in it.
You're just invested in the characters, or yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you have any favorite or least favorite book to movie or TV show adaptations?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So, are we basing this on the book or TV show being a really faithful adaptation of the text, or like, because there's movies that I liked, but it's like this was nothing like the book.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm thinking of it as, did I get the same feeling?
Okay.
But you could say both too. Or like maybe you hated it because it was not like it, that played a part. I loved, let me see, it was called Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. I loved the movie. I hated the book. And that's never happened to me before.
That's rare.
Yeah, but like the movie, I cried. In the book, I was like, what's going on? I don't understand. So that's just like a very random one for me I wanted to tell you about.
For me, one of my favorites recently has been To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. The book is really sweet and charming and lovely and gives you all those like teenage first love feels and makes you just feel so warm. And the show, I think, absolutely does that, or the movie absolutely does that. And the sequel was also great. And I'm very picky when it comes to book to movie adaptations, and that is one that I just completely loved and appreciated, and the soundtrack is great. It's just a great adaptation.
I love that movie as well. I didn't read the book though. Sorry.
You should. They're great.
I know.
I did not like the Maze Runner adaptations.
Oh, I never saw it. I only read the book.
I didn't like the book.
For me.
Why didn't you like the adaptation?
It wasn't my favorite book either. I mean, I liked them. They were plotty, right? Like you're moving throughout that series. But the movie just didn't seem right to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Casting is a big thing for me. Like Hunger Games, I didn't dislike the movies, but PETA was all wrong for me. Like from the book to then what I was seeing on screen. And that really threw me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like Mockingjay as a movie, but I didn't like it as a book either. So that was it was faithful. It just...
It was faithful, but maybe it shouldn't have been.
It was a great adaptation of the text, but yeah.
I know we've talked about Perks a lot. I did not. That was a movie that I absolutely hated.
It didn't work for me either.
No, and I think it's because it's a movie that's entirely based on what's happening in or a book that's based entirely on the character's inner monologue. And when you don't have that, like all the interactions are weird and you don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, so that's really hard, isn't it? Like the last of, a couple of the Harry Potter movies did that for me too, where it's like, oh, I really love this volume in the series, but then it's not right when it gets to the movie. And then it's like, well, but how do you do somebody's inner monologue when it's that many pages, right? So you don't, and you just cut it all down and it's dialogue now, but then people don't talk like that. Or you're
Right.
skipping a lot because you've just cut the whole section that was internal monologue. So I think that's a really good point, though, because Perks didn't work for me either. And
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people it didn't, right? And everyone pretty much loved that book.
I liked the movie just because like I felt like I had to. I'm too loyal. Everything hurts. I really didn't mind it though either. Did you either of you read or watch Looking for Alaska?
Read it, didn't watch it.
Did you like
Same.
the book? A lot of people are like on the book.
That was another book that was so foundational for me as a teen. Like I remember reading it and then I quoted that whole section, if people were rain, she was a hurricane. I don't even remember the quote anymore, but like I would write it on my Tumblr page. Like that was like very foundational for me.
Yeah.
So to the point that like I can't bring myself to watch the show because I'm afraid it will ruin it.
I thought it was so good, but I don't know if you should trust me. I also really love The Hate You Give. I thought that was a great adaptation. I don't know your thoughts or if you guys saw or read either.
Didn't see it, but did read it. So I will run off of your recommendation now.
Oh, see it. Yes.
I
I've been watching it on
was worried about it. Like, it's like, I know they're gonna make this into a movie. Like when I read it, it was like, this is gonna be a movie, right? Like it has to be. And that's like, oh, if they get this wrong, you know, and then then I don't want to watch it.
Any others? Favorite or least favorite book to movie adaptations?
I think the series of unfortunate events, I mean, it's only half YA, I guess, but the show is great. The movie is not great. That's my official opinion on that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot like that where I think the show just is flat compared to books. I think that is often more the case for like fantasy-ish because it doesn't translate, because I feel like when you're reading fantasy or anything that's sort of like, I mean, anything with supernatural things, I mean, that's like Twilight didn't work, right? Like, you know, you read
it work in either way.
head, this is what Edward looks like or whatever, and then he's on screen and it's but that's great. It's sparkly and it doesn't, now you're like, wait, you know, like, it's not translating the way that it should have.
And then it's disappointing because if you try to go back and reread, you can only see the movie in your head and you can't get back to that magical scene that you created, especially for a book that really built a world.
Yeah.
Because then that whole world is rewritten for you.
With Edward's face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or Robert Pattinson.
Yeah.
I mean, that's no shade at Robert Pattinson because he's great. But
well,
like,
he's outwardly said he doesn't even like those movies. So
really?
I think we're in the clear.
yeah, there's been a lot of YA to like film or TV lately though, right? Like Golden Compass, like the whole His Dark Materials, like I consider that YA really.
Mm-hmm. I do too. I never read it though. I didn't want to.
And that was, see, I haven't seen the show yet, but again, it was more of a like, oh, they're gonna mess this up. Like, and then I got worried because it seemed very split as to how people were finding it. And that's hard then, because you can't unsee it once you've seen it. Mm-hmm. So then, and I do go back and reread things. I'm very much a like, especially with YA, because it's so like mashed potato books, right? You know, like it's like, oh, this is what, if I just feel bad, like I'm going to read something I've already read before because it's comforting to me and I know it and nothing weird is going to happen. And like, I feel like I'm doing a lot of rereading at this time anyways, because of the current state of affairs. So like, I do want to go back and be with these characters that were important to me and invested in their outcomes when I know what their outcomes are going to be already, right? Like I don't want a surprise right now. Like
it makes you feel safe.
Well, I will say I found that to be true of YA in general during this time, even ones that I haven't read before. There is a real comforting sense that you don't necessarily get in adult literature because YA is willing to push a lot of those boundaries, but for the most part, it'll take you back to a relatively safe place, or like things are going to be okay. It's not going to push you so far out that you're like left feeling unsettled or, truly devastated at the end. And I appreciate that. And I think right now that's definitely what I need to like help me find some comfort for sure.
So, side question on that. So, during these unsettled times, do you guys find yourself wanting to read dystopian fiction or trying to avoid it?
I'm avoiding it. It's too real. I want an escape from right now.
I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I've just had so much more time to read. So I've just been like, what have I been meaning to read for 3 years? And like whatever's next on the stack, I turn to. But I do find myself in general, like at least balancing it out with more like lighter, like romantic, like I've been reading a lot of YA rom-coms, which I don't actually usually read a ton of those. And they're like a good counterbalance to even some of the more maybe stressful things. And I balance it out more now than I normally would.
Any rom-com recommendations?
Well, right now I'm reading Love, Hate, and Other Filters.
Okay.
I forget the author's name. I'm only like a third into it, but it's really cute, really sweet. There's like a love triangle happening. There's some, the main character is Indian American, so there's that element to it, which is cool, but also just, great romantic drama. So that's a fun one.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Kelsey. Okay. What books are you really excited to read that you haven't gotten to yet?
What you got for us?
I recently watched Normal People, and now I'm like dying to read the book.
I read it.
I read the first chapter, and I was like, oh my gosh.
It's really good. And I don't know if I would call it YA, even though the protagonists are
They start YA, but they kind of graduate above.
Yeah, I actually, we classify it as adult in the library.
Oh, we do? Okay.
But it is one of those kind of cusp books. I mean, college is like a weird time in literature, I think, where sometimes it gets classified as YA and sometimes it doesn't. And for normal people, I feel like maybe the like themes it explores are a little more complex than YA would normally get to, and that's why. But it's definitely one that you could make an argument either way.
Yeah, I think so too. And it on some level reminds me of a book that I think Kelsey and I were going to talk about tonight. I think we both had on our list. We both had Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, right?
Yes.
So
it's even a library book.
About, so that one we do classify as teen, right? I think because it maybe is a little bit less mature on certain levels than Normal People. But I think it kind of circles around some of the same issues where it's, we get into a relationship with somebody, especially when we're younger, and you're really drawn to that person, even if maybe they're not good for you. And so trying to navigate so do I keep investing in this relationship with this person that my friends keep telling me, like, what are you doing? You guys don't work. You're a bad fit together. But you still just feel this pull to that person. So, I think on the very broad sense of somewhat toxic relationships, both Normal People and Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me touch on just that sort of dynamic being there.
And I feel like a lot of people have that kind of relationship when you're younger before you know better. So that's why it resonates.
Or even as an adult.
Yeah.
I think that's really relatable to a lot of people.
It's like, I've done this.
Yeah. So you can definitely invest in the characters there, whether it's from sort of being in a current place of, oh, that looks like my relationship, that's bad, or, you know, sort of hindsight is like, man, I wish I had read this when I was younger and I would have known to get done with this earlier or whatever it is. But yeah, I think, yeah, normal people, that's a tough one too. And it's when you read the book, like there's no quotes in it, right? It's all sort of stream of consciousness, unbroken, like dialogue isn't formatted the way that we're used to seeing dialogue, which is a little bit jarring at the beginning of the book, but then
it pulls you in
quickly.
Yeah, you're thinking like that.
Yeah, and it works really well. But when you read a book like that, it's like, wait, how is this going to work on screen?
If at all.
Yeah,
So it sounds like it was good though, because I haven't watched that either yet, but it's on my list.
I like it.
Okay.
Me too. It's on my watch list because everyone is saying it's really well done, and they got the casting right, which I think that's so important when you have really two characters that are just carrying the whole book like that.
Okay. Did you guys answer what books you're excited for? That you haven't
What
gotten
are you excited for, Kelsey?
I have one that I want to share, and Heather told me she already read it, so maybe you'll jump in and talk about it. But Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. So it's about a Black girl who lives with her parents, and the home life isn't great. I think there's drug addiction. Again, I haven't read it, but there's drug addiction. But she's a teen witch. Or wizard.
Cool.
Yeah, wizard.
Okay, so she calls it a wizard.
Framed, and this is a tough one to talk about without inserting spoilers into it. So I think I'll leave it as saying that she's a wizard, but it is very much about, you know, the ways that we cope, and the ways that we escape, which I think is really relevant to all fiction, right? But YA especially. So much of it is escapist for us, right? Like going back to like, what do you want to read right now when things are heavy in the world? And like, I'm fine reading dystopian right now. I don't want to read things where people get sick though, right? So like you cope by kind of creating these worlds or finding these universes to fall into. And it's great. I mean, it's a really wonderful book. I think you're going to love it. I would highly recommend it to anyone, and I'm really excited to see what else that author does, because I think she's got a really powerful voice.
This is a debut, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's her first book. And for me, when I've read reviews, it's mostly framed as a magical realism, not like a full, fantasy or sci-fi book. And so that really excites me. I don't see a lot of that in YA, and so I was excited to kind of see how that's done. And for me, I'm not like really a full fantasy reader, so that kind of like adding those elements in but still having some grounding in reality appeals to me, so I'm excited about that.
So my excited book, I just haven't gotten to it yet, but I think it came out last year. Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Rebay. And it's about an American college student who goes back to the Philippines to investigate the murder of his cousin as part of Duterte's war on drugs. And it looks really, I don't know, it looks really interesting to me. And it's gotten good reviews, so I'm excited to get into that one. And then I also, for a graphic that I really wanted to read, there's 2 in it so far, and I think there's probably going to be more. Scott Westerfeld's Spill Zone.
I didn't know he had a graphic coming out.
So the first one came out like 2 or 3 years ago, and then the last one was more recent.
Okay.
But this one, I think, because I watched Chernobyl, and
I want to watch that.
and now it's like, oh, disaster stuff seemed right up my alley. So, the like blurb on it was that there was an event that destroyed Poughkeepsie, New York, and it created like all sorts of dangers, but like manifestations, and the main character's sister went mute during the event. So I think it's sort of a fantasy meets disaster, dystopian hodgepodge graphic, but it's 2 books in, and I like Scott Westerfeld a lot. I loved Ugly's series. So
The
great.
steampunk
So
one.
I'm really excited to see the graphic.
Yay. That's excellent. Do you think we have enough time to do like a round robin of like books we didn't get to, but you still want to recommend?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Kelsey, do you want to start?
Yes. So the Truly Devious series is a really great YA mystery series. The first one, Truly Devious, starts with, we're doing a full synopsis, or are we just saying like
You
the
can if
title?
you want.
Okay. And basically, there's 2 mysteries happening. It's about all these teens who go to a boarding school, and they're all really smart, and they do their own projects. And the one girl's project is to research a murder that happened at this boarding school 100 years ago in the 1920s. And while she's researching it, like a second mystery springs up in present day that connects to the past mystery. So she's solving both at once. There's the 1920s element. It's a 3-book series, and they're all out now, so you don't have to wait and find out what happens, which I did. So I suffered, so you don't have to. But it's really great, really fun, and all the characters are kind of quirky and have different passions, and so it's cool to see them all interact and use their skills to like solve this mystery together.
Thank you, Kelsey. Heather, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I'll go with another graphic and then one other that I think you and I shared on our talking before this list. So my graphic is Anya's Ghost by Vera Broskal. It's so good. It follows a high school student who feels like she just doesn't fit. She doesn't fit at her school. She doesn't fit in her body. She doesn't fit in her sort of cultural community. She's just not finding like where she sits as a person. But then events unfold and she finds this ghost who then attaches to her. So you get sort of the coming of age story. You also have the supernatural element, and the whole bit about finding herself and growing her self-confidence. It's great. It's such a fun book, a really great graphic. And I think that was Vera Broskal's debut as well. And she's written things since. So she's one that if you like it, you can keep growing with her. And then my other one was Althea and Oliver, which Rachel and I talked about. It's really good. I won't reread it right now because it does, one of the main characters does have an illness that he's trying to figure out. But it mostly follows the friendship, like lifelong friendship, of the 2 main characters and how their relationship evolves, and is changed by the things that he's going through, and then some decisions that she makes in response to his illness and sort of what happens and how it unfolds after that. But it's really great. Christina Moracho's the author. Rachel may have more to say about this, but I think it's one of those books that like I'll often recommend if somebody liked, Eleanor and Park.
Oh, loved Eleanor and Park.
This is a really good, like
It's
sort of
just
in that vein,
Yeah.
where you just get really attached to the main characters. They're very relatable, even though they're going through some difficult things. And I think Christina Moracho is just a really exciting voice right now. So those are mine.
Okay. So I struggle to talk about books because I'm afraid to like give out anything. Like I want you to experience it how I experienced it, but I'll try. So I really recommend They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. So I guess this would be considered in the future, but you know when you're going to die within a day. And so these 2 boys both get the notice that they're going to die in a day, and they join an app that brings like people that are going to die together so that you can kind of hang out before you die, like if you need a partner in death. And that I don't want to say anymore, but it was really good and heartbreaking and just perfect.
Wow.
Kelsey, do you have another one you want to talk about?
Sure, yeah. Well, since we mentioned Rainbow Rowell, I love her Carry On Simon Snow series. So a little bit of backstory. She wrote a book called Fangirl, which is about a girl who goes to college for the first time as a freshman, and she kind of finds solace in writing fan fiction about, it's basically like a fake Harry Potter called Simon Snow is the Harry Potter. And so she after she wrote that book, people were so interested in these little vignettes that she would write of the fan fiction about Simon Snow that she wrote a whole spin-off series about Simon Snow.
Yeah.
So it's like an alternate, kind of edgier Harry Potter, and Simon loves the Snape character basically, or not the Snape, the Draco character basically.
Oh.
That's very different. And so it's there's a lot going on. It's really fun and funny and just silly and great and so addictive. And every time she has 2 in the series now, I don't know if there's plans to continue on. I can't remember where the last one left off, but I just remember every time one comes out, I go through it in a day. It's just so fun, and it feels so familiar because it is kind of riffing off those Harry Potter themes. But yeah, it's great. I love it, and you don't have to read Fangirl to read the Simon Snow saga, but Fangirl was also good if you wanted to read that as well.
I read Fangirl, but I don't have any desire to read these spin-offs. I don't know.
I love them.
I like Fangirl as it exists, and I don't want it to exist anymore any other way.
Well, the other thing that I like about them too is the audiobook is great. They just got a really wonderful voice actor with the most perfect British accent that really just puts you in the experience. So if you were ever going to explore those, that's the way I would recommend it.
Heather, do you have any more, or are you good?
I think I'm good. We've thrown a lot of books out there tonight.
Yeah, we have. Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah, that's all. That's all I have too, I think. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for the Young Adult Readers Advisory. We have more virtual events at pgcmls.info. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.